Let's kick this bitch off with a story that is every bit as true as it is unbelievable. In the summer of 1952, the nation's capital was rocked by a series of UFO sightings that the public clearly saw, drawing the attention of the highest levels of government. This was the peak of the 1952 UFO flap, a period of unprecedented UFO reports across the United States. On the night of July 19th, air traffic controllers at Washington National Airport spotted several unidentified targets on their radar screens. These objects were moving in highly unusual patterns, making sudden stops as well as impossible right-angle turns that defied the capabilities of any aircraft. The controllers notified their superiors, and soon the skies over the nation's capital were swarming with these mysterious craft. It was as if something were keeping us in check. Pilots in the area also reported seeing strange lights maneuvering above them, as C. Pierman of Capital Airlines observed 6 fast-moving white tailless objects for over 14 minutes. When he radioed the control tower, they confirmed they were also tracking the unknown targets on radar. The sightings that night set off a media frenzy. Newspapers across the country ran banner headlines about, quote, "the invasion over Washington" and "saucers swarm over the Capitol." So the Air Force was forced to respond, which is very notable concerning they have only ignored events like this previously, but when it happens to their home base, all of a sudden, work gets done. The sightings continued on the night of July 26. Once again, the radar operators at National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base tracked numerous objects moving at incredible speeds, some reaching over 7,000 miles per hour in an instant without a gradual acceleration. Multiple pilots in the air also reported seeing strange lights that would vanish as they approached. This time, it was go time. The Air Force scrambled fighter jets to intercept the unknown craft, but the pilots were unable to parallel. One pilot, Lieutenant William Patterson, reported that he could see the targets all around him, but that they were simply too elusive to keep a stable sight on. The White House was deeply concerned with these events. President Truman himself listened in on a conversation between his Air Force aide and Captain Ruppelt, asking for an explanation. Ruppelt, still lacking any concrete, suggested the sightings could be caused by temperature inversions affecting the radar, but many of the witnesses, including experienced air traffic controllers, dismissed this notion and insisted that they had seen something highly unusual. So the next time someone quotes the old adage, "Why don't they just land on the White House lawn?" you can tell them, well, they practically did, but how quickly we forget if the media so decides us to. So what was really going on in the skies over Washington in 1952? The official explanation of natural phenomena has long been challenged by those who believe the sightings were an extraterrestrial origin. But what if the truth is even more weird? Carl Jung was nearing the end of his life during these events, so it is safe to say that he wasn't able to cover this anomaly in his work on flying saucers. Events like this are so numerous that people tend to throw out Carl's notion that UFOs are a product of psychic projection. The evidence has just become too abundant at this point for it to be a spiritual phenomenon. But wait a second, this is Carl we are talking about, not Freud or any other overglorified crackpot. We are talking about a noted prophet who practically invented our current understanding of depth psychology. Carl was not a believer in extraterrestrial craft, causing us to claim him as a skeptic, but this is flat wrong. He simply brought an argument to the table that was so far outside our assumptions that it was misunderstood by those seeking a simple answer. Carl knew there was something in the air and couldn't deny that, but he also saw clearly that we tend to see ourselves in things that we can't explain. So blaming aliens coming from another planet, hell, that is simply something that humans have been wanting to do ever since we found out that other planets existed. Dr. Jung found that these things have been in our skies since the beginning of humanity. People before our modern age of sci-fi assumed the cause of these UFOs to be many other origins that don't line up with our current assumptions. And if we look at the timeline and cultures that reflect the UFO mystery, we see a clear pattern that is much more clear than the UFO enigma itself. So, when Carl Jung first wrote this long-ass essay on flying saucers, the media exploded with articles that he was a believer. So now basically it was safe for everyone to believe. But when he protested this, the media, although more seldom this time, ran articles that he was not a believer. Something that he also found to be very disappointing. It seems that in this world of black and white, left or right, one side or the other, a truly poignant explanation that doesn't fall on one or either side just falls on deaf ears. This is a really bad habit of ours. We assume that is either real or it's not real. And we never stop to realize that it's our definition of real that is the actual problem here. What I'm about to say is not against the extraterrestrial hypothesis as a possibility, but simply proposing that there are many other options in the bag. This smudge of ink is called a Rorschach test. It is completely abstract and represents nothing. However, when we see it, we indeed do see something objective. The reason this is helpful in psychology is because what you see in this abstraction tells us about your subconscious mind. You see the Tasmanian devil from Looney Tunes, whereas your friend Sean sees a marching band of penises on parade. Your deeply programmed expectations dictate what you want to see and in many cases don't want to see. Now, I am not saying that UFOs are not there or completely abstract, to be clear. What I am saying is that UFOs are extremely abstract from our current ability to understand things outside of our previous notions. In the same way that a good psychiatrist can understand your desires and fears better than you yourself can by gauging your reactions to these ink blots, it seems that Carl could tell a lot about the desires and fears of an entire culture based on their reactions to UFOs. But just like the blots of ink indeed do exist on paper, the UFOs also must exist in some way or another. Just because something is abstract doesn't mean it's not there. In fact, in a way, it's more real than real, considering that it exists within us and outside of us simultaneously, unlike a dream or an idea. If we look at the human interpretations of things seen in the sky over a timeline throughout cultures, we learn a lot more about ourselves than we do the anomalies seen. But what if that very notion can be reflected outwardly to help us find an objective answer to this mystery of all mysteries? Let's start at the beginning, prehistory. The people who drew on cave walls painted a lot of very strange things, including UFOs. Well, the majority of the strange objects seem to be human-animal hybrids called therianthropes. I have also noticed an abundance of flying turtles and giant thunderbird types. This oldest one, right off the bat, is the most difficult because we really can't get in the heads of prehistoric man. Maybe those flying turtles were weapons and people used to throw turtles. And also there's the hallucinogens that they were known to take. In biblical times, of course, we have the wheels within wheels of Ezekiel and an abundance of arcs flying around. Biblical times had biblical stuff flying around in the sky. In the ancient East, like India and whatnot, we read tales about flying carpets and lamps. Lanterns of light might pay you a visit, and its driver was often called jinn, or what we call today as genies. Looking at this codex from the 12th century, called The Quickening of the Child in the Womb, we see eyes that bring a sort of fertility into an earthly woman. Carl has this to say about it. From a higher world, an influx enters the fetus. This upper world has a remarkable quadratic form divided into three to correspond with the Trinity. But the middle section is different from the other two. It contains round objects, whereas the other two are characterized by the eye motif. The radiance of the, quote, countless eyes means God's knowledge, that is, his seeing and knowing, with reference to the 7 eyes of God that run to and fro through the whole earth in Zechariah 4:10. The rotunda, on the other hand, are God's deeds, such as the sending of his son as a savior. Hildegard, the illustrator here, adds, all the bad as well as all the good appear in God's knowledge. The souls of men are, quote, fireballs. The square divided into 3 stands for the Holy Ghost entering into the child. The intermediate forms between spirit and matter are the rotunda, early stages of animated bodies. Alchemy compares the rotunda to the fish's eyes. The eyes of a fish are always open. The square, being a quaternity, is a totality symbol in alchemy. Having 4 corners, it signifies the earth, whereas a circular form is attributed to spirit. Right off the bat, Jung is evading the idea of space aliens. And I don't know if Carl's sharp eye happened to miss this, but there is a face sort of hidden in the center of this codex where the always open fish eyes are hanging out. Kind of creepy. In the 1600s, we hear a vast array of accounts concerning fairy circles. In these times, abductions happened due to fairies. They flew around in little chariots of fire, often referred to as fairy boats. This was actually a reoccurring problem back in the day that caused a lot of fear amongst townspeople. Fairy boats would snatch you up and fly you into the side of a hill, like through the earth of the hill and into a sort of residence. They would sometimes hold people captive for various reasons, mostly having women to mother hybrid fairy children. That's worth remembering for next week's video, by the way. And of course, Nuremberg, 1561. We have another mass sighting coined as a, quote, very frightful spectacle seen at sunrise just about by everybody in town. These seem to be interpreted as religious symbols, hence the date that we have here. But it was said that these shapes were at war with each other. For an hour, they fought before falling to the ground, creating a ton of smoke and dust. This brings a physical element to the story. Although everyone could see these objects on the ground, apparently they evaporated into steam. Whoa. This spectacle was seen at the time to be a divine warning, and Carl wrote this about it. The tubes, which are analogous to the cylindrical objects in the UFO reports, these in UFO language are the motherships, which are said to carry the smaller lens-shaped UFOs for long distances. The picture shows them in operation, releasing UFOs or taking them on board. The Great Black Spearhead, as well as the spear shafts, seem to represent the masculine element, especially in its penetrating capacity. Similar things are reported in the UFO literature. Leave your penis jokes in the comments. The emphasis on the cross motif is striking. The Christian meaning of the cross can hardly be considered here, since we are dealing with a natural phenomenon. A swarm of round objects in violent motion shooting in opposite directions and reminding the reporter of a battle. If the UFOs were living organisms, one would think of a swarm of insects rising with the sun, not to fight one another, but to mate and celebrate the marriage flight. Here, the cross signifies a union of opposites, vertical and horizontal. A crossing as a plus sign, it is also a joining together, an addition, which is also an individuation symbol, being the union of the 4. So we see in that case that Carl, in a way, is placating the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but quickly diverts it back to alchemy and personal psyche. In medieval times, UFOs were seen as flying ships, like literally boats with masts. Beings that emerged from these aircraft were seen as sailors and reported as such. In many accounts, these sailors would swim through the air as if it was water, and if captured, the so-called sailor would drown and die. And incidents like these are in multiple accounts, making it that much more weird. In fact, on one day alone, April 17th, 1897, there were at least 14 separate airship sightings on that single day. Vallée writes about it. In one particular case, it was said, the object sailed over the public square, and when it reached the north part of town, collided with the tower of Judge Proctor's windmill and went into pieces with a terrific explosion, scattering debris over several acres of ground, wrecking the windmill and water tank and destroying the judge's flower garden. That last part is kind of funny. The report went on to reveal that the pilot of the ship, the Being, who was not an inhabitant of this world, unquote, had died in the accident. Papers found on this person, evidently the records of his travels, are written in some unknown hieroglyphics and cannot be deciphered. This ship was too badly wrecked to form any conclusion as to its construction or motive power. It was built of an unknown metal resembling somewhat a mixture of aluminum and silver, and it must have weighed several tons. The town today is full of people who are viewing the wreckage and gather specimens of strange metal from the debris. Luckily, we had some people who held on to some of these components. It was found to consist of aluminum, about 83%, and zinc, about 16%, with possible traces of manganese and copper. The combination could originate with numerous common alloys, aluminum alloys, according to the McDonald scientist, but not prior to 1908. What is interesting about some of these fragments of metal is that they are elements that can be found on Earth, but they contain no traces of fluoride, which is a byproduct of the aluminum manufacturing process. If we create aluminum, it's impossible to create it without fluoride. However, it's not found in these fragments. Eventually, later, these UFOs became seen as airships, like hot air balloons carrying passengers, and they were out looking for water. Although people saw these giant winged balloons, this is still well before any known aircraft was invented. People were not flying yet. And the crafts seen by witnesses do very much reflect technology proposed by Leonardo da Vinci, as well as crafts seen in fantasy novels at the time. This would make one think that people have vivid imaginations, but there is a problem with that. The sightings were not only abundant, but they followed a pattern of travel throughout the United States that was linear. This was before phones and internet, but apparently not before coincidences. Authorities looking to debunk these sightings with the vivid imagination hypothesis, they would fly lanterns over the same areas expecting to get reports of UFOs as a result. This was an attempt to prove that people see whatever they want to see, but the UFO reports never came. And the people who saw the lanterns reported them as just that, lanterns. But the metallic craft that your Uncle Steve saw was swamp gas. You gotta love the swamp gas debunk. Hundreds of people will see a metal saucer flying around spastically in broad daylight, and authorities are like, well, sometimes the earth farts. So you'll have that. In World War II, we have the Foo Fighters. A plethora of pilots saw these things, and most of which assumed it was technology from the other guys fighting on the other side of the war. But the Foo Fighters never downed any aircraft or caused any damage. It seems like they were there to observe, if anything. What? Oh, all right, you're waiting for a Foo Fighters joke, like with the band. Okay, well, all right, let me see. All right, one of the German fighters said that he was so stumped by these orbs of light that they got the best of him. I'll put the unsubscribe button in the description. Going into the 1950s, we have cases like Antonio Boas. The UFOs then seem to reflect the sci-fi of the time, having like tripod legs and literal windows and stuff. Despite how goofy that sounds, we still have hard evidence of some of these sightings, like the ground beneath turning to stone and no longer growing vegetation, or even trees in the nearby area, and only the nearby area facing the UFO in question, being burned by radiation and various other impossible results.
Then, in the 1960s and 70s, UFOs seemed to evolve various colored blinking lights, and in no surprise, what a colorful time that was indeed. But a couple of the most notable cases would be a doctor who was healed of a leg injury after encountering one of these colorful crafts in 1968, again bringing hard evidence to the table. In 1976, Iranian fighter jets encountered a sort of colorful drooping starfish-shaped UFO and encountered equipment malfunction as they approached the craft. This not only marks one of the first times that equipment malfunction has been reported, but also one of the first times that UFOs have been seen splitting off into multiple different UFOs. Moving into the 1980s, we see further reflections of technology at that time. The Hudson Valley UFO sightings were about as abundant as it gets, having been seen by hundreds of people, with reports all coinciding with each other, also involving multicolored lights. This is when UFOs started to take on new solid shapes like triangles and boomerangs. And one of the most notable was the 1986 encounter by pilots of Japanese airlines while flying over Alaska. Even though we have a wealth of evidence supporting this particular case, the pilot who reported this incident was given a desk job directly afterwards, only to be reinstated with his job of flying planes much later. Which is so strange to me that after all of this worldwide phenomena taking place and being reported by millions of people, this one pilot who happens to say something about it seemingly gets grounded for doing so, quite literally. But what we have to note here with our subject is what this particular craft looked like to the witnesses. It was kind of boxy and had various blinking lights that resembled exhaust to the pilots, a type of technology that we just don't see anymore in UFOs. Because going into the 90s, we are predominantly looking at cases that are silver lens-shaped craft. To be clear, the silver lens-shaped craft has been seen throughout history, yes, but seemed to be on a lesser occasion the further back you go. And at this point, it is worth noting the Ariel school incident of 1994 in Zimbabwe. But we covered that entire case in length on one of our first videos on this channel. The quality is low, but the details still hold up, so I very much recommend that you check that one out. But I mean, with that case, just 60 kids seeing the same thing and drawing the same thing, and then having psychiatrists all over the world looking at the camera and saying, children cannot lie like this, much less conspire. Absolutely impossible. Something did happen. We fast forward to today. We have an abundance of photographs, radar reports, military footage, yada yada, of these like sleek, slim, black UFOs that everyone is jumping to call UAPs. Our language seems to change along with the UFOs. I think the pattern still stands here, because a sleek, black, thin craft looks like what we have today with iPhones and laptops. These UFOs look like a damn PlayStation 15. So, multiple similarities and variations over time. What should we make of this? As a big fan of Carl, I am apt to think that we are indeed seeing something so abstract that we assign it with whatever our psychological understanding is capable of seeing. But this does not explain the obvious anomalies in each time period. Sleek and silvery disc-like UFOs have been seen in generations well before they were known and popularized. You look at this Chinese painting of something that was seen in ancient China, it looks like one of today's Pentagon releases. And when people were being abducted and molested by fairies, the actual true-to-time accounts of them described fairies as being short, gray, flaky-skinned people with large black eyes, just like we see with the ant people of the Hopi culture well before all of this. Not to mention the Wangina of Aboriginal Australia that also looks like greys kind of dressed like clowns. weird. As we can see here, something that is in 3 dimensions to us, when passing through a 2-dimensional surface, or realm if you will, looks nothing like the actual 3-dimensional object. Imagine a brain as seen by an X-ray, for example. You see individual slices of it, one frame at a time. In fact, come to think of it, if you were to pass a sphere into another sphere, the combination of the two interacting would take on the shape of a lens, just like we see in the flying saucer archetype that has persisted throughout all ages. At the same time, though, what if instead of a psychic projection, these beings are somehow familiarizing themselves to us progressively and linearly based on our expectations? If you wanted to introduce yourself to Pac-Man, you wouldn't appear to him as Desmond Miles from Assassin's Creed without freaking out Miss Pac-Man. And I hope you guys are proud of me for that Assassin's Creed reference. I had to pull my nose out of a book and look something up online. But worthy of a side note, those games they seem actually like really cool. Dude, I was at GameStop in the new Assassin's Creed game, Origins. They have like the building the pyramids, right? And the pyramids in that game were not built by ancient Egyptians, which is accurate to today's like understanding. Jung strikes back in his book entitled A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Skies with a brilliant yet admittedly complex thought, hence his trouble with the media, saying that if you look at Egyptian history, we find manifestations of mental changes that appear to transform with a sort of a constellation of psychological dominance of our projected archetypes. The symbology used back then was that of plasticity. It was liquid, but was not changed on purpose necessarily. They instead accompany long-lasting transformations of our collective consciousness. A falcon once symbolized the sun hovering over the horizon, like we covered in our video, Mars Face Speaking. You fast forward to today, and the falcon represents speed and accuracy, like depicted in Animorphs, a book series for preteens that was just so much better than Goosebumps in every way possible. If you know, you know. Come at me. Jung also argues that saucers were seen in dreams almost as often as in the waking state, but in both cases seem to represent similar mythologies to the observer. He calls this a visionary rumor. This is distinct from an ordinary rumor as it springs from an unusual emotion or something so deep and suppressed within the psyche that it emerges as a vision. This is where things get controversial considering the collective unconscious, because being that we have many cases of multiple witnesses, oftentimes with hundreds of witnesses completely independent from each other. There are countless amounts of abduction cases where separate people, completely unaware of the abduction taking place, saw UFOs at the time and the approximate vicinity of the kidnapping. I also see a pattern in the abduction cases as well, but that will have to be saved for the next couple videos to come. Stay tuned. Carl reports being chilled to the bone by a particular abduction story in which, in Jung's own words, a reliable military man named Kehoe told him of a squadron of 5 military aircraft plus a large seaplane being swallowed up by a UFO mothership in the vicinity of the Bahamas, and then were carried off. The story was solid, and these men are gone, causing Carl to struggle with his own hypothesis, because even if there is a psychological projection here, there must be some kind of cause for it. After all, psychic projection cannot throw back a blip on a radar screen, right? In these cases, the unconscious mind has to resort to a particularly drastic measure in order to make its contents perceivable. By extrapolating its contents into an object, it reflects what is hidden within the subconscious mind, the unconscious mind. This makes me vividly reminded of how close abduction stories tend to be to that of vivid hallucinations with particular plants and spiritual experiences. We have to remember that the conscious mind has no control over the unconscious mind until it is brought up and confronted. However, the unconscious mind has a very, very strong hold over the conscious mind where the observation takes place. This is interesting when we note Carl's report that indicates that ignored spirituality seems to equal more UFOs. Basically, we are endowed with a part of our mind that is meant to be spiritual, and societies that choose to set that aside happen to have a higher amount of UFO experiences. And in this case, I wonder if Catholic people see the most UFOs. Zinger. And then there are the cases that are just so epic that we are left completely speechless and without any sort of hypothesis at all. This footage of some kind of gigantic dark orb feeding off of the sun has haunted me for years, as well as all of you, I think. And even though it is worth showing here, I honestly don't have anything to say about it, except, dude, what the f***? But interestingly enough, years before this footage was a book of fiction called The Black Cloud in 1957. Carl talks about this book as a form of psychic projection in itself. In it, a large dark entity like a cloud or an orb positions itself near the sun to recharge itself and feeds off the sun for sustenance, making you wonder about certain works of fiction, especially like that of Lovecraft, as to whether or not these works of fiction are more of a cosmic download, so to speak. Closing out his thesis on flying saucers, Carl states, quote, "So far, only one thing is certain. It is not just a rumor. Something is seen. What is seen may in individual cases be a subjective vision, but something is there." He states how aggravating it is that the American Air Force suppresses the information it has on the UFO problem due to the risk of panic and mass hysteria. But by keeping the information locked away, all we have to go off is the occasional information squeezed out by journalists, which is far more dangerous considering how the media is run. When going off the media, it is impossible to form an adequate picture of what is happening. When Carl said this, it was obviously long before all this declassified Pentagon footage that we have now. But I am almost certain that he would look upon these bits of footage with a skeptical eye just as much, considering the long run of distrust that the government has already established. Basically, if someone lies to you 99 times, are you going to believe their 100th statement? A small comical side note here is that the book ends by Carl stating that he has said everything that he's got to say on the subject, so an interview would be pointless, and then literally goes into interviews. Even better yet, the very last sentence in his book is literally, and I quote, "The press seems to enjoy lies more than the truth." Classic Carl up in this bitch. Imagine what he would have to say about it today. So this is where it would make sense to end the video concerning this particular subject, but allow me to rock the boat a little bit. Finishing my notes for this video, I happened to glance up at the bookshelf to put this one back, and Carl's last book ever written seemed to kind of jump out at me. Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, his autobiography written at the end of his life. I saw my bookmark sticking up out of the top. I hadn't finished it yet. I realized that if he ever changed his mind about the UFO phenomenon, it would certainly be in here somewhere. I flipped to the back index and sure enough found a mention of UFOs on page 334, a section at the end of his book written at the end of his life. At this point, the man's give a fuck has probably hit zero. I had a bit of a tingling sensation that if he had been playing it safe with his prior analysis for the sake of being professional all these years, this section was going to reveal that. But I'll leave that for you to decide, because our man of mystery seems to have left us with a bit of a riddle. The usual story about the UFOs is that they come from some kind of spacecraft or other planet, or even from a fourth dimension. In one dream, which I had in October 1958, I caught sight from my house of two lens-shaped metallically gleaming discs, which hurtled in a narrow arc over the house and down to the lake. He was doing pretty good at this point in his life. They were two UFOs. Then another body came flying directly toward me. It was a perfectly circular lens, like the objective of a telescope. At a distance of 400 or 500 yards, it stood still for a moment, and then flew off. Immediately afterward, another came speeding through the air, a lens with a metallic extension which led to a box. A magic lantern. At a distance of 60 or 70 yards, it stood still in the air, pointing straight at me. I awoke with a feeling of astonishment. Still half in the dream, the thought passed through my head, quote, "We always think that the UFOs are projections of ours. Now it turns out that we are their projections. I am projected by the magic lantern as C.G. Jung. But who manipulates its apparatus?"